I once made a gruesome discovery when I opened a floating duffel bag I found near the port of Miami. Reddit, what gruesome discoveries have you made? When I was in college I was out for a run one early morning. My run happened to take me through a woods by the edge of the lake. It was mid-October, so water was rising from the lake, creating a very beautiful atmosphere. However, when I turned to glance at the lake, I saw a girl standing waist deep in the water. She was wearing a white dress and had long hair that reached down to the water. I stopped and called out to see if she was alright. No response. I began to look more closely and reached the conclusion that she must be a dummy. It was nearing Halloween, so people were putting up decorations already. However, I looked further on down the trail and saw a pair of bright yellow rain boots and an old-fashioned lantern. I looked back at the girl and realized that there was a tree reaching over the lake, and that there was a thin cord reaching down from the tree, which was attached to her neck. I put 2 and 2 together, and then ran to the police, roughly 3 minutes away, thank God, and dragged them back. TLDR. Found a dead girl that looked exactly like the girl from the ring at school. And that's why I don't run. Runners always find the corpses. Walking with my friend down the street, saw a bucket on the side of the street out in the middle of nowhere. Decided to open the bucket. Dead goat in a bucket. I feel like these are the lyrics to a song played on the banjo by my Uncle Charlie. The 2nd of July, 2005. Drunk man gets in a fight with his girlfriend while sitting in traffic on the Pensacola Bay Bridge. Gets out of the car, sits on the wall of the bridge and accidentally falls off. Dies from blunt force trauma to the head on his way down. 4th of July, 2005. His decomposing body washes up in my parents' backyard as we are preparing for our multi-family Independence Day festivities. The crabs we hauled in that summer were very, very plump. 200 feet of road covered with tree frogs. I mean completely a fine covered, on a back road in NW, Florida, at night. All I could see was a carpet of frogs on the road, illuminated by my car's headlights. What was I supposed to do? Turning around was not an option. There was no other way to get where I was going. Do I drive as fast as I can and get it over with? Do I drive slowly and hope that some may jump out of the way before they are crushed beneath my wheels? I sat there for at least 10 minutes, wondering what I should do, hoping they would all just jump away, but they didn't. At first I opted to go slow, but the sound was unbearable. A crushing, popping noise. I will never get that sound out of my head. About halfway through I decided I had enough. I gunned my old Chevy Nova, but my back tires broke loose and I slid sideways a bit. Finally got some traction and I hauled butt over the remaining 50 featuring also. The horror. It's like some kind of sick reversed Frogger. I got some items back from my mother's fatal car accident after they cleared it. I got a group of plastic boxes that held her cross-stitch threads. They were scratched and encrusted with her blood. I was 12. I don't know how gruesome you would find this, but it nearly made me puke. Living in Hawaii, you normally leave your shoes at the door, so I slipped my sandals off before going inside. I took one step in, squish. Took another step, squish. I looked down but couldn't see anything. Took one more step, squish. I crouched down and realized that the off-white kitchen floor was crawling with maggots and I now had maggots squished between my toes. I was working maintenance at an apartment community. It was a ridiculously hot day in July. We got a call that a resident had white worms coming from under their bathtub. I grabbed the keys and head over there. Sure enough, those white worms were maggots. So I radioed to my manager and let him know what was going on. I thought of 2 things. Is someone freaking buried under this bathtub? Or was there a sewage backup problem? It was the middle of July. The hallways were open air hallways that led to the apartments. When I went back up to the office to get my carpet knife to remove the caulking on the tub, I decided to call the neighbor and leave a message that I might have to go into their apartment to see if there was a problem in their bathroom. The walls touched. I grabbed the set of keys and jumped in the golf cart and headed over. I parked in the back of the building. The back was grass, so I would not take up a parking spot, and as I walked by the neighboring apartment I smelled something god-awful. I was pretty sure what it was, but I pushed the thought out of my mind and searched for a better explanation. I knocked on the door and received no answer. 3 knocks and then I shouted maintenance entering the apartment. When I opened the door I was greeted with a wall of flies. When I say a wall of flies, I cannot paint the picture detailed enough. It was like a snowy channel on television. The smell and heat hit me and I immediately pulled my shirt up over my nose. As I looked inside the apartment I radioed back to my boss and asked him to come take a look. When we walked in, there was a faux ceiling beam in the living room that divided that and the dining room. There was a hole that was broken through and drywall crumbles all over the ground. We walked further into the apartment. There he was, a man that had punctured a hole above his door frame, tied a telephone cord in the sash of his robe around that and his neck. And his neck was stretched farther than I thought imaginable. His head sagged lower than his nipples. I have never in my life seen anything more horrifying. He was a translucent green color. I immediately vomited and ran outside crying and scared to death. I called the office staff and 911. I'll never get that image out of my head. I learned that he had been dead for 3 weeks with all electricity switched off via the apartment breakers. So he was literally baking him there. Ugh. Edit. What got me the most as I was thinking about it over the next few weeks was that underneath his chair there was an ashtray with hundreds of cigarette butts in it, and the fact that he tried to do it in his living room, failed, and then did it again. TLDR. Found a dead person. 0/10 would not bang. I had a friend in college who complained for a couple of weeks about a horrible smell in her apt. Exterminators and maintenance couldn't find anything. Turned out her neighbor had died. She couldn't move because it would break her lease. Worst living situation ever. I think I told this story years ago somewhere on Reddit. When I was a kid I lived in Ghana, in West Africa. A friend of mine and I, both expats, had been spending months digging around in this huge gully a ways from my home. We'd had little pickaxes made from a local blacksmith and dug a little boy-sized network of caves and tunnels into the walls of this ravine thing. It was awesome kid stuff. One day we're out messing around and we dug up a clay pot, a little smaller than a basketball, sealed. It had some markings on it, nothing discernible. We managed to unearth it without breaking it, and were transfixed. Imagine digging up an intact clay pot from some 5 feet down or something. It could be ancient. We started the trek home with our find, planning how we would open said pot and fantasizing about finding gold or secret messages or whatever. Then this guy, Ghanaian, rode past us on a bicycle. We're out in the middle of nowhere, a scrubby field, with a footpath through it. He rides by, and as he sees us he shrieks, swerves off the dirt path and starts yelling in a language we can't understand, so 60 of them in the country, and making sharp, furious throat-cutting motions with a finger. He falls off his bike, manages to remount, and tears away as fast as he can. We were terrified, mystified, more terrified. So we set the pot down and ran home. We asked a woman, local, that worked and lived with us, and she freaked a little, then in bits and pieces revealed that women seal miscarriages into clay pots, seal them, mark them with the intended name of the baby and some religious stuff, then bury them. They're considered cursed. Thank Ghanaian God you guys put the pot down. When I was about 7, my mom was cleaning my bunny's cage outside. I guess she forgot to close the cage all the way when she went inside to get new bedding because I walked into my backyard to find my little Jack Russell Terrier shaking my dead bunny back and forth in her mouth. My guinea pig got out and the dog got it, tore it up and scattered bright orange tufts of fur from one end of the backyard to the other. It was almost like she was deliberately trying to spread it as far as she could. I made this gruesome discovery years after the incident. I was about 5 years old and liked balloons. One day I was up early and playing in the parking lot of our building. I saw what looked like a big balloon laying on the ground. I tried to blow it up but it didn't inflate like a regular balloon. I was like, WTF. So I brought it to my mom to see what was wrong with it. I don't really remember but I hope my mom washed my mouth out with Lysol and told me to never pick up a clear balloon again because I had been putting a used condom on my lips. Didn't happen to me, but there was a Cub Scout troop in my town cleaning up litter in a park. They found a dead body wrapped in a roll of carpet. It had been there a while. Glad we're starting to back to the old school mobster hits. The first day I spent in my medical school cadaver lab. I'm now more used to it, but the first time, it was almost overwhelming. True. We all know that we're going to open up our tanks and find a dead person, but it still does not describe the feeling. Opening the tank, raising the person. By this point my heart was going crazy imagining what the person would look like. Open the body bag. The suspense is building. Finally, we take the shroud off of the face. The feeling was humbling, to say the least. My groups was a frail little old lady. I believe she was 75 years old when she passed. She died of breast cancer. Here's a person who donated their body so that I could receive an education. It was humbling and yet gruesome at the same time. It always makes me feel better when med students talk about how heavy that experience is. I feel like it bodes well for them as doctors. Also, your username is my favorite muscle. I once made a bowl of oatmeal and was sitting down eating it when I looked a little closer and noticed something weird. So I took the bowl into the kitchen and looked into the container and several bugs flew out. I believe they were moths. Needless to say my oatmeal was thoroughly full of lava that I had been happily eating moments before. I lost it right there in the sink and haven't eaten oatmeal since. Sounds like dang pantry moths. Those things freaking suck. At the local animal shelter, I walked into a room with a large bin filled with terminated pets. Just a quick glance at all those different colors of fur piled on top of one another made me bolt right back out of the room and it's seared in my brain. Whoa, not sure I could have handled that. What a sad end to life. I once opened my dryer to take my clothes out and noticed an extra wad of fuzz. I played with it in my hand for a good minute, trying to figure out which of my clothes it came from. Then I noticed the singed wings and teeth. It was a freaking bat that had crawled into my dryer cycle and died, and I had fondled it for a solid minute. TL. Dr. Nananananana frick me, there's a dead bat in my clothes. Back in the wash. On my 19th birthday, I was working along a river in Quebec. That week we had previously found dead mice, dead cats, and a dead beaver while cleaning up along the shore. The dead animals kept getting bigger as I found them and my girlfriend at the time joked that I would find a dead person next. Anyway, on my birthday we were pulling some loose branches out of the water when we noticed part of a jacket stuck to one of the branches. My buddy and I started joking that we had found a dead body and poked around at it a bit. Sure enough, some hair floated to the surface and on closer inspection a dead man was floating face down in the river. We called the cops and while they were questioning us in the police car we saw them pull him out. He was pure white, looked pretty rotten and his lips were black for some reason. I got the rest of the day off work. Happy birthday to me. One time my sister's boyfriend at the time was just leaving our house. He puts one boot on. I guess it felt a little tight so he really jams his foot in there. Feels a crunchy squish and pulls his foot back out. Turns out our cat had killed a mouse and left it in his boot for safekeeping, or maybe it was a diabolical cat prank. Back in 2000, I was working as a private investigator for an agency in NYC that handled workers' comp claims. I was supposed to interview a claimant that had sustained traumatic injury as a result of being trapped between a truck and a loading dock. The man lost all function from the waist down. The claimant was also an illegal immigrant residing in one of the worst areas of Brooklyn, NY. He was living in a halfway house, renting a room there. I had gotten the address from the employer, and I was supposed to pay him a visit and see what was going on with him since he had not returned any calls. As soon as I arrive I know something is wrong. The smell reached the sidewalk. It's a combination of rotting fish with spoiled vanilla and cinnamon. I walked in, since the front door is open. In front of me is a long hallway with doors on both sides. To the right I hear music, so I knocked on the door. A female that was hitting the crack pipe real hard opens up. I asked about the claimant. She said, "I think he dead, maybe for about a week." I asked her which room was the claimant's. She said, "Follow the flies," and laughed. I did and found the claimant. His door was at the end of the hallway and was slightly ajar. The flies and stench were unbearable. I pushed the door and saw the body face down, head crushed probably by a bat or some other object. Upon further inspection I also noticed that the throat had been cut. I took my gigantic Motorola cell phone and called the cops. More than anything it was the smell that got me. I can't forget it. I love how you mention the size of your phone to remind us that it was 2000. I used to live in a cabin in the woods that had a mouse problem. Unbeknownst to me, they were living in the stove. One day, I accidentally discovered the sickening smell of burning mouse flesh and droppings. Still didn't get rid of all the mice though. Never used the stove again. TLDR. Mousechwits. I was fishing and came across an adult black cat that was quite dead along the shore. Cause of death? A stick had been shoved into its butt. The other end was protruding from the cat's mouth. I can't imagine how much effort it took to force that stick through the entire body. I can only hope the cat didn't suffer long. I wonder if its color had anything to do with it. I read somewhere, probably here, that black cats are often targeted for abuse because of the superstition surrounding them. I'm getting into this thread a little bit late. This was more than 10 years ago, so pardon me if the recollection is fuzzy. I used to kayak competitively. We called it canoeing, but I think there may be some differences in terminology. Basically, closed top craft. This would be out at sea. As the senior rowers, we were training some younger kids to row. About 17. We were 18. I was in a doubles boat. I came across another boat which had capsized and the two kids were looking frantic. Apparently, a mother cat had stashed a litter of kittens inside the kayak. Why nobody had noticed them making any noise when we brought the craft to the water I will never know. Maybe they were scared by the motion? In any case, when the kids found out there were kittens in the boat, they promptly capsized out of shock. So we flip the kayak back around and there's water inside it. It's more than half filled with water. Even with styrofoam blocks inside for buoyancy, it's starting to sink in the water. Somewhere inside, there comes the sound of frantic mewing. It's too heavy to do an emergency maneuver to get the water out, so we decide to drag it back to shore. But we can only do this after another craft picks up the two kids. I can't remember how long it took, but we rode our hearts out to get back to shore, all the time listening to the sound of weakening mewling from the boat. By the time we got back, most of them had drowned. I think we fished out at least 2 sodden little kitten corpses. One was still alive, but I can't remember now whether it made it in the end. I haven't thought about this in years. Not sure if our decisions at the time were sound, but I was really young. It was pretty emotionally scarring. Thanks OP. TLDR. Capsized kayak has kittens trapped in it. Heard them drowning while dragging kayak back to shore. That played out way too realistically in my head equals. Once when my family and I were at the beach, it was just us and our dog along the whole beach. Was very sunny, so it was a little odd. The dog, former police dog, retired because he got too old, was walking along the beach and suddenly stood with his head down barking at the sand. We thought it was odd, so my brother and I ran to him to see what he found. We looked and found what looked like a toe sticking out of the ground. Cerberus, dog, started digging at it and whining. So before he dug it up, we called our family over. They saw it and freaked out, called the cops and all that fuss. We didn't see anything because once the adults saw it, they made us walk back to where the family was sitting and not looked when the police came. We did see the toe and were very upset, realizing that we were pretty much standing on a grave. So this wasn't me, but it's a story my dad tells me often. When he was about 16, he lived in New York, in the rural area, not in the city. One week the construction crew was working on paving the road. My dad was walking home. He lived close to the school, and on the way home he passed the construction crew as they were paving a hill. All of a sudden the brakes on one of the dump trucks gave out and it started rolling down the hill. My dad firmly believes that it was at this point that the truck driver saw my dad and his friends as they were walking up the hill. He was heading straight towards them. With barely any time to react, he had the choice between hitting my dad and his friends or hitting the steamroller. He made the decision to hit the steamroller. My dad's first grade teacher's husband was part of the construction crew. He was working just below the steamroller. Needless to say, he was run over and killed. My dad said that there was nothing left but a long red streak with white chunks. A year later, my dad also found his neighbor's husband 2 days dead of a heart attack in the woods when he was snowmobiling. I can't imagine what the truck driver had to live with after that. I was 10 years old and living on a farm. I played the role of gopher for my dad when I wasn't at school and he was doing farm-wise stuff. Fall harvest was a week from starting and it was time to prep our old 4.0 combine for use. The out-of-season machinery sits mothballed in a shed all by itself 10 months a year. As he fired up the combine and started the head, cats started running out from within the machine. They decided to call home. Then came the screams. I'll never forget. Numerous cats were still inside as the beast came to life. As the auger started sputtering, cat parts shot all over the ground right in front of me. 18 years later, the memory still makes me sick. One summer at my friend's house we started a bonfire out of a pile of old branches they had been piling up. After a minute or so we started hearing these weird noises coming from the fire. At first we thought some of the wood was wet and making noise, but we decided to kick it over anyways just to double check. At the very bottom of the pile there was an old shoebox with a hole chewed out of the corner. Around it were a few of the charred pinky mice that attempted to escape. Inside there were a handful of semi-burnt pinkies, still squeaking pitifully. They were all too tiny injured to save, so my friend ended up putting them out of their misery via the lake. It pretty much killed the mood the rest of the trip. Over the summer, I opening my grill to find a mouse's nest in there. I went to get the mouse nest out, and the mouse was still in it. I chased the mouse away. The next day, the nest was back. I went to brush it out again. This time, when the mouse came out, it still had its babies stuck to its teats. It ran away with baby mice suckling. I was at my friend's house and we were playing something I can't remember. I was running in her front yard when we heard a small noise that only birds can make, but the noise was quite weird too. A quick glance at the grass and we saw that I killed a little bird by stomping on it. Oh god, I'll never forget that poor bird. I sliced up a baby bird with a weed whacker once. I didn't even see it until it was too late. The horror. I went to take a shower in the basement of the house I was staying at. There was some sort of sponge on the floor of the shower, so I poked it with one of their shampoo bottles, and slime maggots came out as it slid around. It was a dead bat. On my friend's birthday when he was around 12, give or take a year, him and a friend decided to go on a bike ride. They were riding around and they saw a car parked at the edge of the woods with someone hunched over the steering wheel. They went over to investigate. A man had shot himself in the head and there was blood everywhere. They called the cops and everything was fine. Well, sort of. Happy birthday. Not so much a discovery but something that will stay etched in my mind. Was about 12 years old waiting for the school bus. Seen my cat across the street in the woods, so I started calling her over. The minute she started crossing the street a car came and ran her over. Still remember seeing her bounce around under the wheels. Her head was crushed but her body was still flinching. I thought she was still alive since she was still moving. But then another car pulled up and the man offered to bury her for me. Pretty traumatic for young me. My sister and I lived with my dad the last 2 years of high school. He cooked, but not very exciting stuff. He usually bought us frozen dinners and pizza that we'd warm up on our own. We came home from school one day and wanted Totino's, so we preheated the oven and turned on the TV. About 5 minutes later, we go into the kitchen to throw a pizza in and notice a really bad smell, like sewage. The house my dad was renting was a really old farm home. It was built in 1908 and didn't have central air, plumbing, anything. He had spent the first few months putting in new pipes, a water well, adding insulation, and fixing the roof and floors. We thought it was the nearby bathroom, maybe the toilet. Nope. Sink? Nope. Then we go around the kitchen trying to find the source of the funk. We realized only one thing. It has to be the oven. We opened it and saw a large rotisserie pan covered in foil, but we smelled. Oh man, we smelled the full smell. Putrid. Rank death. We gagged, ran out of the kitchen and to the front porch for fresh air. My sister was coughing and I was dry heaving. Turns out my dad had planned to make a pot roast 3 weeks before. He never cooked it and forgot. It was raw, rotten meat just decomposing in its own juices for 3 weeks. We didn't eat Totino's that day. TLDR, my sis and I discovered rotten meat. When I was 12, I went to a bonfire at my older brother's friend's house. There was a group of about 8 of us all hanging out around the fire, just roasting marshmallows and hot dogs and having a good time. We all kept complaining about the smell in this friend's fire pit, though. It was one of the worst things I've ever smelled to this day. He told us that the day before he and his dad had been burning tires and the smell was left over from that. We all felt this explanation was good enough and went back to gorging on the food. A few weeks later, My mom brought in a newspaper that had this friend's picture on the front page. Turns out, he had murdered another kid my brother knew over a bad drug deal and hid his body in the fire pit. He'd had the bonfire in order to burn the body. The smell we were complaining about was this poor kid's body. To this day, I refuse to eat hot dogs or marshmallows. TLDR. I ate hot dogs that were cooked over a dead kid. About 7 years ago when I was traveling around Australia, I walked in on two siblings, brother and sister, going at it, doggy style. Could have been worse. They could have pushed you out the window. I too once found a bag. I was with my grandfather and we were walking in the park. I took him to my fav secret place to go by the river. I found a leather bag there and brought it to my grandfather, and when we opened it, it had two ferrets inside, alive. It was such a hot day that their little paws were burned from scratching the leather. The poor things were severely dehydrated. The butthole that did this also tied their hands to the handle of the bag. Just in case they managed to get out, they wouldn't be able to run away. We called a ferret rescue and they took them. One of the two didn't make it. We heard that nearby someone also found a dog that was hung by the neck from a tree a few weeks later. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.